I have noticed a trend that has been happening in the past 6 years of me being in this space. I'm sure it's always been there, but it seems like it's becoming more prominent. The anti-DM. You see, in traditional D&D, the way the media, accessories, even the official books would have you believe it to be played, the DM is a completely separate entity from the players. They are the dungeon master. There is a screen that divides them, and they're expected to do 90% of the work and are often hosting, controlling music and lighting. And because of that, it tends to only attract certain types of people, leaving the majority of people who play D&D just that, players. Hence the talk that comes up every few years of there being a DM shortage. Very few people want to DM. Isn't that weird? The anti-DM gets rid of those boundaries, allowing the Dungeon Master to be more like a player. And you don't need to do all the things I'm going to talk about in this video to become an anti-DM. Just doing one or two of them is enough. But these things do tend to decrease the amount of work a DM does, brings a more collaborative and relaxed feeling to the game, and allows the DM to feel like they're playing the game a little bit more rather than running it. And these are not for everyone. Some DMs like the power and control they have over the game and the players, and there are some tables out there where the players are just so chaotic they need the separation of player and DM, otherwise the whole thing just falls apart. But this is definitely a GM style worth giving a try, or just taking a few things from this may make your games easier to run. The first thing you can do to become an anti-DM is to get rid of the DM screen. For the longest time, the official way to play D&D is with a separator. They're to serve a few purposes, such as hiding things like notes, or minis or terrain from your players before they are ready to share it, or to have reminders on about the rules or your players' characters. But if you're an experienced DM or don't mind letting the players get a peek behind the curtain, getting rid of the DM screen altogether gets rid of some of that divide between the church and state, the player and the GM. It's going to make the whole table feel more like a hangout session and make everyone feel more comfortable. Plus, so many GMs I know nowadays have a laptop in front of them anyway, which can serve the same purpose as a GM screen without losing the personability of not having one. And right off the back of not having a GM screen, roll in front of everyone is my next point. This is part of being the anti-GM that actually makes the game more tense. Without the DM screen, there's no safety net. Whether you have ever fudged rolls or not, rolling behind a DM screen means your players think you could fudge. And that changes the vibe at the table. Players feel safer. Rolling in front of them means that safety net is gone. You could crit and one-shot kill that player right now, and you wouldn't be able to change the roll. It also just builds trust at the table that there are no secrets. And now there may be multiple reasons why you would want to hide rolls from your players, but you could roll some rolls in front of your players, most rolls even, then hide important ones. But by getting rid of the GM screen and rolling in front of everyone, you're pretty much acting like the players are, which makes for a really unique vibe. Next up is to do less prep and improvise more in the game. D&D DMs are expected to do a fair amount of prep, so the anti-DM move is to do less. How do you do less? Improvise more. And be okay with everything not being perfect. Let your players know that you're improvising more, and even ask them to be patient with you, or even help to push the story forward in-game themselves, rather than relying on the GM to drive everything forwards all the time. If you can show up to DM a D&D game putting as much work into it as the players have, which is most often no work at all, then you have pretty much won here. Now, I do think very few people could and would show up to every game with zero prep, but certainly cutting the prep time down and building up some improv skills that allow you to effortlessly wing scenes won't just improve your D&D life balance, but also make for more fun, unpredictable games that could veer off in random directions. And this brings us to the next one. The anti-DM does not care about everything being perfect. It is a pretty common trope for a DM to actually stress out over sessions, getting that perfect playlist together, making sure every player is having the best time they could be having, thinking at the end of the session that you didn't do a good job. And by the way, you did a great job. But the anti-DM puts themselves first and treats the players around the table like their friends, not their customers or students. They are not there for you to entertain them. They're all there to collaborate and play a fun game with you. If you don't like putting on voices today, or acting out how NPCs talk and move, don't. If you don't feel like poetically narrating every scene, don't. You can convey the same information faster and easier just by telling the players what happens rather than showing it. If the players want that kind of fun roleplay and scene setting, sometimes they can just do it with each other. There's like 4 of them and 1 of you. If they really want social role-playing and to put on funny voices, they can do that without the DM. And I'm not saying never do things like that, by the way. I'm not saying don't try to make a game the best it can be. I'm just saying that sometimes you won't feel like it. So don't feel the need to. Relax, enjoy yourself, and be okay with your games being a little janky or having plot holes sometimes. And look, I'm a firm believer in getting better at DMing. I believe it's an art form that we can learn and improve to run the best game possible. Just look at the plethora of videos I have on this channel about what we can learn from famous DMs. But the cold hard truth is that your players are going to forget 90% of your games anyway, and it's just not worth stressing and spending too much time over the game, unless you enjoy doing that. Value your mental health and your free time, and be okay with naming a goblin Bobbert the Seventh, or an NPC's accent changing randomly. The game will still be fun, even if it's not perfect. And this brings me to the next way of being an anti-DM, and that is to rely on your players to help out. And this can mean a bunch of different things, from just asking your players to be cool with a janky, less than perfect, heavily improvised game, to asking them not to look at your notes when you note something down secretly because you don't have a DM screen, or asking them not to use information they may have accidentally seen. But it could also be asking them to roleplay with each other more, or to be more decisive in-game and do things. It could also be helping out running the game. In my games, I have a player who controls the music for me, and another player who helps me out with rules when I forget something, and I even have players who bring snacks, meaning it's just one less thing I have to worry about. You can also even allow players to hand out heroic inspiration in-game to other players. If every player just does 10% more work, then the DM gets to do like 50% less work, and the whole table will benefit because of it. You can also give the players more input on the world and story. A great example of this is next time a player character gets the DM to make up an NPC on the spot, then ask them, what's this NPC's name? The DM can say to the player, you tell me what this NPC's name is. Next time a player character returns to their hometown where they grew up, the DM can ask the player to describe that town. Quite simply, delegate. The next anti-DM power move is to put the onus on the players to run a good, safe game, not the DM. It always blows my mind how often you hear about tables having a bad DM and it falling apart, and how often a table has a bad player, but the DM should have really done something about it, and now the game's fallen apart. It's always the DM's fault. This comes from the idea that the DM screen has all the authority. The DM screen has a divider that makes the DM the parent, and it's on them to keep the peace. Relax. You are all 30 years old. The DM can be a referee in the game and can be a facilitator outside of the game, but if a player at your table is making someone else feel uncomfortable, it is everyone's responsibility at the table to come up with a solution to that problem. And you can be a democracy, you can rely on the DM to make final decisions, but you can also vote on outcomes, or at the very least, make your preferences heard. I actually just saw a Reddit post that talks about one player having an issue with 4 other players all playing animal species. The one player said they couldn't suspend their disbelief since those animal species would not all be in a party together. Cats and birds? Come on. He also called them all furries and did not feel comfortable with that. So he brought it up to the table, demanded change, and everyone looked to the DM to figure out a solution. Now, whatever your take is on this, and mine is that this guy's a jerk, the DM is kind of unnecessary here. This is a dispute between players, and they should be able to sort it out between themselves. And I'm not saying the anti-DM doesn't help in these situations or stays quiet. I'm just saying that the group makes decisions together. But that is just safety and table logistics. What about running a good game? I often hear about GMs feeling like their players are not having fun because maybe combat is running too long, or a player feels like they are not getting the spotlight enough, or there's just kind of nothing happening in the game, the players don't know where to go or what to do, or it's just a little too chaotic. Well, ask your players to be responsible for that too. If the table is a little too chaotic, or feel like nothing's happening in the game, then the players should lock in, and the players' characters should make things happen. If the players do not like how long combat is taking, or that they're not getting enough attention, they should let the table know, let the DM know. Have open communication. If everyone is responsible for making it a good game, the game will get better. I also just want to vent here a little bit about DMs needing to be good at making sure all the players have a moment to shine. I hear this all the time, and as a DM, I think I've gotten quite good at handing the spotlight to quieter players or players who haven't done anything for a while. I'm good at like keeping a balance there. But as a DM, I don't actually have as much power as the other players do to make sure that this happens, to make sure that everyone is getting an equal input into the game. A player can realize another player has been quiet for a while, then have their PC interact with the other PC. They actually control the spotlight more than the DM because the camera follows them. Sure, the DM can take control of the camera when needed, move it to another PC to see what they're doing, but the camera is always on a PC. So it would be nice to normalize players bringing other players into their scenes and sharing the camera. But yeah, that's my little vent. Players be relying on the GM too much when they themselves have a lot more power than they think they do. Which brings us to the next one. Run a proper Session Zero. Now, I see a lot of comments about Session Zeros. I've made 2 videos about Session Zeros, and the vibe I'm getting, and I could be wrong here, but the vibe I'm getting is that no one bothers to run them. Let me know in the comments if you run Session Zeros or if you think they're pointless. But it feels like the average DM doesn't do one. Or if they do, they're not doing it in like a productive way. But Session Zeros are so important, especially if you want to run the game in the ways I'm talking about in this video, because it is different and it does put more expectations on the players. So by talking about all that in a Session Zero, you're going to make sure everyone is on the same page. You can also have players openly create characters and backstories together, make the world together, and have no secrets from each other, which is going to make for a smoother, more transparent game. Now, this is where I reiterate, I'm not saying this is how to DM or that you should do all these things, just that if you wanted to try a different style of GMing, then these steps are worth giving a go. But I have to say, having a Session Zero where you lay everything out on the table and the players lay out everything and you build the characters, world and story together, it makes for a super collaborative, fun experience. Sure, one player character might not be able to drop the ultimate twist about their backstory onto another player character, or you couldn't have a player character be really mysterious about their background because they're building them all together and everyone knows what's going on with each other's characters. But what you lose from that like suspense and surprise, you gain in depth. Player characters have a much stronger bond because they've been created together, often with backstories that intertwine, and the other players can build up other player characters' special moments because they know what they're going for and they know the history behind it, and it can make it all way more impactful. It's also less work on the DM, because the players usually understand everyone else's goals, they know character backstories, and build out a map of the world with the DM. So the Dungeon Master really kind of just needs to sit back, narrate, and referee, because the players are doing everything. Also, if you find this kind of video interesting and want to see more like this, subscribe. It helps the video do so much better, which helps me know what kind of content I should make next. Now, this is where we get into very experimental stuff, and it's not something I've ever tried, but it's definitely playing D&D in a way that is not normal, and I think probably fun. Rotating GMs. Now, let me finish. Having an agreement that every month a different player at the table GMs. Same campaign, same world, same characters, but everyone gets a chance to play and GM. There's also a bunch of other playstyles similar to this that I like the idea of, such as having 2 GMs at the same time instead of 1, role-playing with each other as NPCs and the players. Maybe one handles the more narrative role-playing world side and the other handles the more mechanical, numbers and technical side. I've also even heard of games where the GM power transfers to different players multiple times in the same session. Like I said, experimental stuff.
Yeah, this is a 3-headed GM.
But my point here is just being open-minded and not stuck in the mindset of, oh, this person is the forever DM and everyone else is forever players. This is how D&D is played, and this is how it should be played, and this is how it always will be played. Sometimes being open-minded and experimenting, you may find like you and your table suits a much different style of play. Also, if you're this deep into the video, thanks for watching. Type deep in capital letters in the comments, so when I forget I said this, I'll see a bunch of really confusing comments coming in. Also, like the video. And next up is making the game your own. It's bouncing off exactly what I was just talking about, but don't just play the game specifically as intended. There are so many tables out there that don't realize that they just don't like combat, yet they have combat every session because that's how D&D is played. There are tables out there who love combat and hate role-playing, yet they try to get through all the social encounters so they can finally do what they love, combat. Now, those are extreme circumstances. You must probably have players at your table who like different things, and the mix of gameplay is a healthy compromise. But by once again thinking outside the box of what normally a D&D game entails, and figuring out exactly what your players and you as a DM enjoy, you can start cutting out the fat and just concentrate on bringing your table joy. Maybe you never run combat again and the game's better because of it. Maybe you only ever run combat and the game's better because of that. Which brings me to my next point: open communication and trust. The reality is there are a lot of DMs out there who just do not trust their players, and there are a lot of players out there who just don't trust their DMs. Like, they trust them as people, as friends, but there's something that happens at a lot of tables where once the DM-player dynamic happens, the DM thinks the players are trying to trick them or would not make good decisions if they had more power, and some players think the DM is getting enjoyment out of causing misery for their player characters, and are not just in it to make the players feel like heroes and tell a good story. The anti-DM trusts their players to all put each other first, to play selflessly and to try and make sure everyone at the table is having fun, including the DM. And the anti-DM trusts that their players trust them, to put the players' fun first and try to run a fair, memorable game. And sometimes mistakes will happen on both sides, and that's fine, because everyone around the table is only human. I've said this in videos before, but don't treat your friends like players or the GM. Treat your friends like your friends. And once you as a GM start trusting your players, you'll see your players start trusting you in return, and trusting each other as players. Once they see what it feels like, they'll follow suit. And if you have players who take advantage of that trust, who act in bad faith, then it's worth giving them the benefit of the doubt, talking to them about it as a table, and if they continue to do so, if they continue to be problem players, then maybe they're just not the right fit for your table. And whose job is it to kick them out of the group? Not the DMs. Well, maybe the DMs, but there might be a player more suited to that kind of conversation, or it might be better off done as a whole table. But the point of this video is just to showcase a different, more relaxed DM style that spreads the workload around a little. I know I mentioned it already, but it's worth reiterating because I know I'm going to get comments about it. Every DM and every table is different, and there is no one shoe that fits all. There's no one way to play D&D, but I do think it is good for DMs and players to experiment with different styles, to see what works for them, then compromising and finding a middle ground with the other people around the table. You may disagree with some of the playstyles I've talked about in this video, and that's fine. I disagree with some too. You may disagree with all of them, but I think it's important to showcase them. One of the biggest issues in D&D today is expectations, that the game is going to be played a certain way and people being confused or thrown off when it's played differently. But I believe different playstyles should be celebrated, and everyone should be a little more open-minded. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you DM a little differently than what would be considered the norm, and watch this video next. Thanks for watching.